Okay, so this video is about survival situations with bow drill. And what I mean by that is you're in the situation where you have no knife and no string. So I love this because, again, we go back to this idea where we're looking to create the essence of what we're trying to achieve. Oftentimes people are just their mind's going to shut off when they don't have perfect conditions, but those imperfect conditions is what fuels creativity and what creates new solutions. And there's so many when it comes to fire without a knife and without string, or your bow drill string, whatever you're using. So the first thing I want to talk about is the fireboard and the spindle. So these are relatively easy pieces to make without a knife. So what you're looking for is, in this case, I might be looking for a downed cedar where I could break off a piece to create the fireboard, or find, again, either it's a chunk that then I shape, I'll get into that shortly, or a branch. The only thing with branches, in my experience, is that the wood is more dense. And remembering here that the softer the wood, the easier it's going to be to create ash. So, of course, in the pinch, you might end up using a branch, but I would generally lean on the side of finding a good chunk. Again, in my experience, it's just a piece that you can rip off the tree. So ideally working with a tree that has maybe fallen or split just naturally, and then kind of working with that, because again, we're assuming that we don't have a knife and that we don't have an axe. And so, yeah, looking for anything that you can kind of grab and rip and get a chunk. Once you've gotten to that point with the chunk, what you're going to do is find a large rock, so not a small one, and you're going to start grinding whatever chunk of wood that you found to roughly the shape of a spindle. Of course, it's not going to be as symmetrical and even as if you had a knife, but you're just going to be grinding. And I say big rock because you want to be able to use your whole body to get into it. Your tips for your spindle are going to be just roughly pointed. You're not going to be able to, have more of this rounded edge and then more of the nipple shape for the top. So just remembering that we're going for, general creation of something like this, as detailed as you can get, with using a big coarse-ish rock and your softwood. And then same thing with the board, but we'll get into some of the different options going with the fire board. So one option, we'll start with breaking a piece into, or a branch, or just say a piece of wood into two. So what you're doing is you're creating, so just say you have your branch, it already is naturally split. Again, we're really going to have to be looking and seeking and scouting for these pieces. You split that in two, then you have a relatively good fireboard. So we have a flat surface on top, and maybe the bottom of the board is rounded, but in a situation like this, that's not super important. So that's an easy way to get a really, really rough fireboard. But there's a lot of other ways that I'll touch on. So another one is, if you take, just say, one branch, or maybe just a chunk again of wood, and you start splitting it. When you split it, you're going to make a notch, right? So this notch is V shape. So when you start splitting, it starts to create a V, and then you would find a way, maybe, put something in between the branches to keep the opening depending on the wood. And then you're going to be grinding right where that V has formed without your knife. Another technique is the two-stick method. So you get two chunks of wood. The sticks are nice because they kind of create a groove naturally. You tie them together, and then you're going to be bowing in between those two sticks, and then your ash and your coal is going to form in the crack in between the two sticks. yeah, so if you have, just to finish that, if you have your board and you're trying to do that bow method, another thing I wanted to just share, this is not my go-to. I would necessarily not do it this way, but it's an option because you never know what situation you're going to be in. But if you can find a small rock that is sharp on one end, I've heard stories of people just carving their notch with that sharp rock. And then to start your spindle going into the fireboard, you're also going to kind of use it like a drill bit, same sharp rock, and just start the notch so that then it's easier for you to bow into. But again, that's not necessarily my go-to, but it, like I said, it's an option. So we spoke to this in another video, but you can also do the notchless or the waterfall method is what I was taught. So you can see it on this kit. Let's here, this it would be the starting of it. So you already have an existing, notch or hole in the board, and then you're starting another one. And then what's happening here is that this notch will then, the ash will fall into this hole. This is another example here. Here you can see that I played around quite a bit with this kit. And then this is your more traditional, notch just by the edge of your board. So just to repeat that, you create one hole, one divot, and then your other one is overlapping so that the ash then falls naturally into that first hole or notch that you created. And this board is not the best example, but if I was in a survival situation, I would be doing this method all along the grain. So here you can see I'm going against the grain. It's going to be a lot easier and you're going to have more in your favor if you put your holes and your notches along the grain of the wood. So what's really nice about the waterfall method as well, or the notchless method, is that your coal is then off the ground. So if it's cold or wet, it's also really going to help you to catch and start the coal faster. So now we'll move along to the bow. So, people will generally use a hatchet or a knife or something to get their bow. If you didn't have that, what would you do? So in my experience, it's been to find green wood. And what you're going to do, which is kind of the technique that I did do here, but again, I did do this with a knife, but you could do this without a knife. So you're going to find a bow that is either already split or that you can split somehow easily. So again, looking for green wood. And then you can see here how this is super simple. It's just, the stick is cut, spliced down the middle, just ends naturally. And then I'm shoving the cord into that crack. So the other side here, I also would recommend where, you don't need this is the technique I've always used, and some people drill holes and stuff and make their bows really fancy, but also finding a Y stick like this allows you to wrap whatever cordage you're using at the tip, and then you really only need to have one end that you then split to then put the whatever string you're going to be using on the other side. So that's kind of the tip for the bow. And then speaking to cordage, so what cordage would you use? So if you're in a true survival situation, you could use your shoelace, you could use clothing, rip up, pieces of clothing and then do reverse wrap with cloth to make it nice and thick and strong. We won't talk about reverse wrapping in this video. That will come at another time. But if you were to reverse wrap using plants, so imagine we're not using anything, human made. And again, we're testing our skills to play around, to learn. I would use plants, of course, to make your cordage. And if, again, you're in a survival situation, you're not going to be making super thin cordage, and it's not going to be the prettiest, but you want it to be functional. So generally people say like thickness of your pinky. So you're making really, really rough, thick cordage. Other options would be tree bark, tree roots, or pounding, thicker twigs. Because again, we're trying to create something that mimics cordage. Yeah, and just again, being creative with it, you're going to want something that you have in abundance. So if one thing breaks, then like your string breaks while you're bowing, then you have options to gather more of that material, and it should be quite easy. You're not going to be wanting to expend too much energy. If your cord breaks over and over and over, that will get quite frustrating. Yeah, so the last thing I wanted to touch on was, just a little story of a survival situation that I was in where we did start fire without a knife, and we didn't use shoelaces or clothing or anything like that. And what we ended up using, which was really awesome, was we didn't end up doing we didn't end up making a bow at all, which was cool. And our group worked together. So there was a few of us, I think on the kit, there was generally like 2 very active people and then 1 person kind of just helping out on the periphery. But what our kit was cedar with a cedar spindle with, it was a river stone that someone in our group had kind of pounded out a little notch. So this is an example of a stone, but this one I found like this, which was incredible because it's the perfect hole and the perfect size for your palm. But our friend had found a softish rock and then had just grinded with another rock, a little divot just like this to use as the handhold, which is really, really awesome. And then we harvested cedar root, and one person essentially was holding the kit down. So handhold to baseboard, and then the another person was wrapped the cedar root around the spindle and was just kind of sawing with their hands like this and working the kit without a bow. And I think that was more beneficial than trying to make string for a bow, because using root with a bow, like imagine harvesting root and putting it like this, you would have a lot less control with it, and I believe it would break a bunch. In this kit, we broke a bunch of roots to make it happen. So what we did is we harvested lots of roots at once, would just bow, warm up the kit, dry out the kit, get some ash. Okay, the root splits and breaks, grab another piece right away, keep the warmth of the kit and the momentum going, and then going back and forth. And eventually we got a coal, and it was a very precious one. And that fire actually never went out for the rest of that experience, just because it was all so precious. So hopefully that gives you inspiration and just fun things to play. As I've said before, your skill is only going to get better as you challenge yourself. So play around with different ways to start fire. Try it without a kit or without a knife, without perfect cordage. Most people, when they start, they actually just use paracord as their bowstring. I've never done that. I've only started my fire using either buckskin or plant cordage. So hopefully you can test yourself. And again, maybe you don't start with this extreme situation and you build up to it, but have fun and continue to learn from fire.